since then. Now, in the case of the mRNA vaccines that have been so much in the news this week, the story does not start with Operation Warp Speed. It does not even start with a historic 63-day sprint from the publication of the viral genome to the first patient injected by the mRNA test vaccines. The sprint, I believe, began when President Trump, this sprint actually began when President Trump was still ridiculing the idea of the pandemic. The sprint actually started when dedicated employees at NIH and Moderna who understood the danger of COVID-19 and began working day and night. The story of federal investments in mRNA vaccines actually starts, I believe, back in 2009 when President Obama was at the time unhappy with the speed of response to the H1N1 swine flu epidemic, convened his scientific advisory panel, PCAST, which they did back in those days, and famously asked them, if you guys are so smart, how come you still make vaccines with chicken eggs? Okay, so 1 year later, in August 2010, PCAST put out a report on re-engineering vaccine production for pandemics, which emphasized the potential of new technologies to make vaccines and therapeutics available far faster in a pandemic. Heeding the advice of this scientific panel, which they did back in those days, in 2013, the Obama administration awarded a $25 million DARPA grant to a startup called Moderna to develop their mRNA vaccine platform for pandemic response. This was followed in 2015 by a $125 million investment by BARDA, so that by the end of the Obama administration, Moderna had mRNA vaccines and therapeutics under test in both animals and humans. So why is it that the Obama administration prioritized mRNA vaccines and therapeutics? Well, first off, it's their speed of development, which we saw realized in the 63-day sprint. It's the speed of manufacture, which has to do with the high yields of in vitro transcription reactions, and their potency. Scientifically, the exciting news of the last few months is that a potent human immune response can come from doses as low as 30 micrograms of mRNA vaccine. So 30 micrograms, what does that mean? What it means is that this 1 liter bottle, if it were full of mRNA vaccine, would contain over 30 million doses. This is enough to vaccinate every one of Americans' doctors and first responders, or all of its seniors over 75 years old. And that is why the Obama administration invested in mRNA vaccines and therapeutics starting back in 2009. And without those investments, frankly, Project Warp Speed would not have squat. Now, Dr. Fauci, would you agree that when there are great medical breakthroughs, that the public needs to be reminded about the long line of federal R&D that's led to vaccine and therapeutic successes that we're anticipating?
Yes, Congressman, and it even goes beyond what you're saying. Everything you say is very well taken. And I think maybe it's a good time to recognize the fact that the generosity of the Congress through multiple administrations, both Democratic and Republican, and whether or not the Congress was controlled by Democrats or Republican, the support of biomedical research that goes back decades, leading to everything that you're talking about, but even before then, some of the monoclonal antibody work, some of the work that's being done with the molecules that are directly antiviral molecules. I think we often forget that when we think of the product, and often forget, as I think you appropriately pointed out.
Well, what scientific investments we should be making now to ensure that we're better prepared for future pandemics? And how can we support those investments with the kind of science budget cuts that we're seeing proposed in the Trump and Mulvaney budgets?
Well, I mean, I hope we don't get cuts, but in fact, we have been very
They've been proposed. They've been proposed again and again. Okay. Anyway, looks like my time is up.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, we're here. Yeah, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record story from June 5th, 2020, underscoring what Dr. Fauci would answer today. Dr. Fauci says large protests taking place across the country are a perfect setup for spreading COVID-19. So he said that a month ago, even though he wouldn't say it today. So that's a story from Business Insider. But also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the June 12th story. Dr. Fauci tells ABC Powerhouse Politics that attending rallies, protests is risky, even though today his position seems to have changed. Obviously, his position changed on many things many times over the last several months. But that's in those two articles for the record.
Yeah, I'll yield to Dr. Fauci.
like I said, any crowd, whether it's a protest, but in any crowd in which you have people close together without masks is a risk. And I'll stick by that statement. It's a public health statement. It's not a judgment on why you're there in the crowd. It's a statement related to the fact that you're in a crowd.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Mr. Chairman,
And without the-
Chairman, I didn't ask you a question, you let him respond, I was making unanimous consent.
And I'm gonna run this meeting.
Well, I would like a chance to
Just
respond to what you
remember,
said.
I'm gonna chair this meeting.
No, I understand,
Now, without
that's why I said, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, your statements, whatever you got there, will be entered into the record. And without objection, in a gathering, whether you're protesting or whether you're politicking, in a gathering would be risky. And that's what the man has said.
Yeah, but that's not what's happening, that's my point.
Oh, with all the
That's not what's happening, there are limits, people can't go to church, can't go to
Mr.
work,
Chairman,
can't go
that's
to
out
school.
of order.
But they can protest all they want.
That goes for the Democrats and Republicans. I'll make the decision as to who is out of order. I'm gonna be as gentlemanly as you will allow me to be.
I appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you. And with that, I'll give 5 minutes to Mr. Green.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and witnesses for your amazing service to our country. Thank you. First, Dr. Fauci, there was a bit of an uproar about a picture of you at the Nationals game without your mask on. I think you were seated with your wife. You had a close friend there with no one else nearby you. And that gentleman who was with you had his mask on. I think you have said in the press since you took it off to take a drink of water. I just want to point out, according to an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I quote, significant exposure to COVID-19 means face-to-face contact within 6 feet with a patient with symptomatic COVID-19 that is sustained for at least a few minutes, and some say more than 10 minutes or even 30 minutes. The chance of catching COVID-19 from a passing interaction in a public space is therefore minimal, end quote. The science seems to be pretty clear. We should absolutely wear masks when we're in close contact with those outside of our household. I think that was just the conclusion of that discussion. It's not a crime to pull your mask off, to take a drink of water in 100-degree temperature when you're seated next to your wife and someone else is there. I guess I make the point to show how the media has created all of this hype, which has led some officials across the country making decisions that are not based on science. And there are real consequences to those. I mean, if people are hot, they shouldn't get a heat stroke and not take their mask off. So I'd like to move on to some other troubling actions that were done this week. This week, the chairman of the committee sent 4 letters, all Republican governors in red states, demanding extensive documents related to coronavirus response. The White House Coronavirus Task Force report has 21 states listed in the so-called red zone. This isn't about transparency, it's about ridiculing 4 states, including my home state of Tennessee, and it distorts the truth. The letters singled out 4 GOP states, but what about the other 17 states? Why didn't California get included in the letter? They've seen an explosion in positive cases. They're in the spike. They're in the 21 listed red zone states. Targeting only Republican governors when clearly 17 other states, many of whom are Democrat, are also experiencing the spikes and in the red zone shows this effort has nothing to do with getting answers and is, as the chairman has said in his opening comments, politics over science. No scientist who wants the truth samples just Republicans. Honestly, it's a laughable partisan strike. It also compounds the insult to all Americans for the failure of this committee to look at the real culprit. As I said in previous testimony, a Columbia University study showed that 66% of American deaths could have been prevented if China had spoken up 1 week earlier. That's thousands of American lives that could have been saved. So instead of addressing the cause of 66% of our casualties, the select committee on the coronavirus puts on American businesses, the Trump administration, and now 4 state governors, all Republican. And we know other blue states are in the exact same situation. This is the definition of partisanship, but I can hear it now. Didn't the right send a letter to certain governors? Yes, we did.
We sent it to every single governor who refused to follow the Trump plan, emphasis on plan, and sent COVID positive patients back to nursing homes, killing patients. We didn't select just a few of those. I applaud Congressman Foster, who approached me as a physician and asked me to join a bipartisan partnering with the administration to assist in the execution of Operation Warp Speed plan. That's how we should be functioning. That kind of bipartisan action. Finally, on a positive note, I wanted to mention the Swedish study and then ask Dr. Fauci some questions about that because I think it really illuminates some exciting findings in science. T cells are a type of white blood cell that regulate immune response. The Swedish study found that many people with mild asymptomatic COVID demonstrate so-called T cell immunity to the coronavirus. The study further found that twice as many who tested positive for antibodies had T cell immunity. So we know there are tons of people out there with immunity that we aren't testing. And I'd love for you, sir, if you could comment, educate America, educate all of us a little bit on T cell immunity and what the ramifications are to the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll very quickly try to answer that. So there are two limbs of the immune response. One is an antibody, which is a protein that is made by the cells in the body to bind to the virus. It is usually the hallmark of protection against infection. There's another limb of the immune response called the cellular immune response of T cells. And those T cells have the capability of essentially suppressing or killing cells that are infected and preventing the cells that are infected from making new viruses. So there are two parts of it. Even though one is generally felt to be protective against the initial infection, the other is an important complement to it. You're right.
You were gonna go in there work, you know, shit.
NIH grantees from La Jolla just came out in the journal Cell
Well,
showing the same thing. That in individuals who were infected and recovered, they had T cell responses, but importantly, there was T cell reactivity also detected in non-exposed individuals, which means that maybe there's some memory from other coronaviruses that are benign cold viruses that you were exposed to that might, and I say might, explain why some people, even children, might be detected that they had exposure that's not measured in antibody, but measured by T cells. This is work that we really need to pursue. We're just at the cusp of understanding the importance of this type of response in COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda's time has expired, and as I yield to Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes, may I address the letter which I have responded to? You have an answer from me. You have not seen the answer, but just be sure, since you put it on the record here, let me put my response on the record. Our response had to do with the 4 states that had refused to comply with the critical recommendations from the task force. And all 4 have governors who have publicly stated that they do not plan to comply. In contrast to that, we did not send a letter to those states that did indicate that they will comply with the task force. And that's 3 of those states Republican governors, and they did not get a letter from us. So this had nothing to do.
What was that? Oh my God.
But the political response.
Girl, let's call me Alan Rich.
Responded to the science.
They're the bane of my existence.
With that, I yield to Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes.
Yes,
Mr.
baby.
Chairman, for calling this hearing on the urgent need.
Go fuck with your brother.
national
Get him.
plan. A stack of paper is not a plan. A large and unwieldy stack of paper is not a plan. A plan is a comprehensive and coordinated strategy for victory, and we haven't seen anything like a plan. No one has shown